Okay, so I think we can officially start the event. Hi, everyone. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Mara Corlade. I am the head of main events in ILSA, which stands for International Law Student Association, and we are based in The Hague. And I'm also studying international and European law at the Hague University of Applied Sciences. I will be very brief. I just want to say that we are very happy and proud to present this event to you, which is called Hot Topics in Law. And I also want to thank our distinguished guests for agreeing and saying yes to our invitation, and also to everyone for joining us tonight. Last but not least, I also want to say thank you to the ELE Society and especially to Glory for the collaboration. We hope that it's the first of many, and also to the ILSA members, especially the board and the main events committee for their support. And without further ado, I will give the floor to my amazing colleagues and moderators of this event, Ada and Valeria.
So hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining tonight. My name is Ada Tataru. I am a third-year law student, and today I'll moderate the event together with my fellow colleague Valeria Martinez.
Hi everyone, thank you for being here. Good evening. My name is Valeria Martinez. I am a second-year international and European law student at the Hague University and also a member of the main events committee. I will now give the floor to our guest from the International and European Law Society, the president herself, Glory.
Good evening, dear all. Thank you to our professors that have accepted to join us this evening. So my name is Glory, and I'm a student at the Catholic University of Lille. And our association aims to promote the interest in international European law outside of the classroom, as well as federating all the students within our bachelor's degree and master's degree. And so we hope that with tonight's conference that you would have more interest in these atypical subjects of law. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Glory. It's a pleasure for us to have you here and collaborate with you. Now we are going to tell you a little bit of our guest speakers, and then we will give them the chance to introduce themselves. First, we would like to welcome our guest, Dr. Delphine Dogot. Is joining us from Catholic Lille University, where she is an associate professor of law. She is also a visiting lecturer in Sciences Po. She has had a chance to study many fields of law, such as algorithmic law, philosophy of law, and legal thinking, and even law and technology, which interests us today. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Yes, and joining us from the Hague University, we have Dr. Juan Salmeron Henriquez. This is the second time we have the pleasure of having him as a guest speaker of ILSA, so thank you very much for giving us your time again. Dr. Salmeron is an attorney from Chile. He specializes in commercial law, intellectual property, and digital rights. So we are very excited to have him here sharing his expertise in these very unique fields of law. We would now like to give the floor to the speakers for a brief introduction of themselves as well. Ms. Dogot, would you like to introduce yourself?
So first, I wanted to thank you for this invitation. I'm very happy to be here. And I feel at home that you're all international lawyers, because before doing all this law and tech stuff, I was mostly trained in international law. And so my heart is also there in these topics, which might, be seen in what I'm gonna talk about today. And also I'm happy to meet Juan Salmeron. I'm also partly Latin American. My mother is Argentinian, so I salute you from the South. So I'm an associate professor in law at Lille Catholique University. I'm the director of the Studio of Law and Digital Technology Studies, basically, where we both have master program and summer schools in law and digital technology coming up, and do a lot of applied research and general events on law and digital technology. We're launching this year. I'm very excited. And so this is what I'm doing mostly, but as you said, I come from various fields. So that's it. So thank you so much for the invitation again.
Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for the invitation. Also, my name is Juan Salmeron. I'm an attorney from Chile, and I am a lecturer or professor, I'm not sure. I think it's lecturer, the exact title, at the Hague University here in the Netherlands. I specialize, as the people introducing me very kindly mentioned, in intellectual property, commercial law, and digital rights. I continue to practice as an attorney. I engage mostly in consultancy over intellectual property with bands, artists, as well as with software companies. So mostly in the intellectual property field. So once again, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm looking forward to this. What I'm sure will be a very interesting talk.
Yes, thank you very much to both speakers for being here today. We would now like to give the floor to Dr. Salmeron for his presentation. So yeah, we're gonna begin shortly with that.
So please feel free to share the screen, and if we can help in any way, let us know.
Okie dokie, can you see everything?
Yes.
Okay, just so you know, there is a video clip in my presentation. When you put this on YouTube, it is definitely going to trigger the automatic content detection. So when that happens, it'll give you an option to remove it. You're going to have to do that. So just to remove that clip. But okie dokie. Welcome, everybody. Once again, thank you very much for this very kind invitation to today's presentation. I'm going to be speaking to you a little bit about video games and the phenomenon of the use of loot boxes within video games. Here we go. So first of all, video games are, despite the fact that they tend to be seen as toys or as things that kind of people who are rather immature engage in, regardless of all of those concerns, the fact is that it is the most profitable section of the entertainment industry by far. So this growth has resulted in a tremendous increase of games and of course different business opportunities for game developers, thanks to the fact that broadband internet has expanded through most of the developed world, together with the massification of smartphones, which have in turn also become a means through which people can play video games. Online distribution of services such as Steam, Origin, Google and Apple Play stores, as well as other similar services, have also increased the availability of video games in a way that changes completely from what it was when I was a kid, for example, when you actually had to go to a store and buy a video game and bring it home. Now most things are available online. As an example of exactly what I mean when I say that the entertainment industry is largely driven by video games, you can actually see the difference here. In the case of the United States, for example, you can see that video games surpass film and music combined as a source of revenue. This has created an enormous opportunities for the industry and for different players in the industry to actually engage in new and creative revenue generating schemes, some of which are certainly more questionable than others. Excuse me. As I said, in the last 10 years, digital sales have actually overtaken physical sales, meaning that the majority of games are now purchased digitally. And that has come with two consequences. The first is that there is a virtual elimination of the secondhand market. When I was a kid, if you had one of the first Nintendos, for example, you would have a game and you would be able to sell it to other people or give it to somebody else. That phenomenon pretty much does not exist anymore. If you buy a game digitally, that game is not actually yours. You are acquiring a license that is in turn protected through a digital rights management system that prevents you from being able to transfer it to third parties. It is the use of games as a service more than games as a good. In addition to that, it has also opened the opportunity for what is known as the perpetual commodification of video games, meaning that a game that used to be a single purchase, you would go to the store and buy a game and that would be all you would do. The actual initial purchase is perhaps the least relevant part of the entire useful life of the game. In reality, often the games will be free, in fact, in what is known as the freemium model of games. And instead, what the industry seeks to do is to continue generating revenue from this game as time passes. Indeed, as I mentioned, when I was a kid, you would buy a game in CD, then you would buy an expansion of this game, which would change the game rather radically. And that would pretty much involve getting one game first and then buying a second game that modifies the first. The system now has changed in which the purchases are considerably cheaper. And that thanks to those much cheaper purchases, that changes the game in a much smaller way. This has given the games a certain incentive to exploit and extract value from the games in a perpetual cycle of commodification. In other words, you continue to create material that changes the game. That has created an incentive in turn to, first of all, create games or release games in a way that they are already incomplete, so that people need to constantly be acquiring more and more and more in order to actually enjoy the game in the way in which it was intended to be played. This is what is known as the freemium model. In the case that a game is purchased or not actually purchased, is acquired for free. And also the pay-to-win revenue model, in which the only way in which you can actually win within a game is through paying a certain amount of money. And I think that perhaps the best way in which I can explain this to you is by showing you a short clip. It's about 1 minute, I think, from South Park. And South Park actually did a fantastic explanation of what the freemium video game model is. Now, when you see the issue of video games, you will often hear, and this is a bit more of a boring part first, that downloadable content or DLC and microtransactions are spoken about in different ways, particularly if you're a video game player and you check, for example, forums on video games, or if you read magazines on video games, you will see that the manner in which they are mentioned is that, oh, well, this game is bad because it has microtransactions, or this game is good because it has DLC, but no microtransactions. The reality is that these are meaningless terms. These are terms that were largely developed by the industry in a way that allowed them to say, no, we're actually the good ones. We have this one, not the other ones. They don't actually have a meaning. They don't have any significance that is relevant for any sort of regulatory system. It is similar to what happened in, for example, the US Supreme Court in Jacobellis v. Ohio, where in order to define hardcore pornography, they said, well, I cannot define it, but I know it when I see it. And it is similar to what happens when it comes to the issue of microtransactions. It tends to be more of a situation in which a person commenting on a given transaction will say whether they enjoy it or not, or they think it's positive or not. So any regulatory attempt, and this is when it actually connects to the issue of loot boxes, any regulatory attempt that affects the manner in which there are these small transactions within video games has to instead pay attention to how the transaction is conducted. So before we get into the actual meat of the argument itself, let me backtrack a little bit and tell you where we are. So when you have the current market of video games, it is shaped by more than just originally buying the game, playing the game, and then selling the game or giving it away. Instead, games nowadays, either you pay for them or you don't pay for them. The revenue model that the majority of them have, and really is the majority of games, is that after the purchase of the game, you are expected to do additional purchases. Now, these purchases can be of two kinds. There are purchases that are pretty direct, regardless of what you are getting. So you might be if you're playing a game like, I don't know, Call of Duty or any of those games where you're carrying a weapon, you can buy for a certain given amount of money something that makes your gun look different. So that would be a direct purchase where you know exactly what it is that you're getting. The type of transaction that has created problems within the industry and regulatory problems that we will see now are those in which, although you are paying money, you don't actually know what you are getting. So these are transactions in which video game players get a randomized reward in exchange for a financial payment. The video game player pays $1 or 50 cents, and in exchange of that, they don't know what they are going to get. Instead, they are acquiring the chance of getting something. Now, if that sounds like gambling, there is a reason for it. And in fact, several regulatory agencies around the world have reached that conclusion. Now, before we actually see how that regulatory approach has been taken in different jurisdictions, let's first think about the mechanics that go behind it. The important thing here, and it is what really makes these transactions completely randomized, is the fact that the player does not know what specifically they are going to get. And so that you understand a little bit how these things work, because to be honest, I don't play video games now as much as I did when I was a kid. So, but I have a friend who most certainly does. So he had to help me a little bit when it came to understanding the mechanics. So you're playing a video game, whatever it is that you're doing. And maybe the game already offers you the possibility of buying, let's say, a mystery box, a loot box, loot crate, or whatever. So you just buy the possibility of just having this chance purchase. Other games have it in a way that you get those boxes while you're playing the game and you buy the keys for those boxes, but the situation ends up being the same. You are paying an X amount of money and you do not know what you're going to get in return. This is how the situation looks in practice.
Yes! I've been wanting.
Or like this, which is very much like a roulette. You see that the game is playing, you paid something, and this thing that these companies have argued is not gambling, is just moving a little bit slowly, exactly like a roulette would do, and giving you a prize at the end. Now, the challenge of loot boxes is, as you can imagine, the fact that there are gambling mechanics involved. There is a purchase on the part of a consumer and a randomized reward based on chance alone on the other end. There is also what has been called a deliberately addictive design. The fact that, as we saw here, for example, if I can bore you a little bit by playing this again. Here we go. Oh.
Yes!
The music, the lights, the sounds, all of those are not included there by chance alone. In fact, I urge you to, I don't know if they're open right now, but here in the Netherlands, if you walk outside of a casino, you will constantly hear ding, 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 and a lot of coin sounds, because it seeks to create in you the idea of acquiring money. In this case, it seeks to do something quite similar to what you would get in a slot machine or in a roulette in a casino, which is to have these lights, the reward, the constant movement that is, for example, in the roulette one that we saw, that you think, oh my God, I almost got that one, maybe I should try again, exactly the way in which a roulette would work. The deliberately addictive design is what is called a Skinner box, an operant conditioning training, that you reinforce in people the idea that a certain behavior leads to a given result. It is usually done with animals that learn that if they pull a lever from time to time, that lever will randomly give them a reward. If you read those rats there, for example, they start moving that lever for the rest of their lives because they have learned that that might eventually give them a reward. That is operant conditioning, and it is a little bit of what goes behind the design of loot boxes. That is an example of a Skinner box. The elements of gambling are fairly straightforward, and since I see that we're running a little bit out of time, we will move through this a little bit faster. We have the game of chance, the consideration, and the fact that it's a reward as a thing of value. When we talk about a game of chance, it's simply that, a game in which skill plays a very small or no role at all when it comes to obtaining a certain reward. Consideration simply means that one party pays something to another in exchange for something. In this case, the consideration for the reward is the payment made by the player, and the reward has to be a thing of value. And on this point, I want to bring your attention to an interesting phenomenon that happens with loot boxes, because what many companies have said is that loot boxes should not be considered gambling because these things have no actual value. So in reality, and I completely agree with this, a skin or something that makes your toy gun look different in your toy, it doesn't actually have a value. But the laws of supply and demand say otherwise. There is a gigantic secondary market for the rewards that you get from these boxes. And the prices that are paid for these things are crazy. I wish there was another way to describe them. We're talking about thousands of dollars paid for a virtual item that you can only use in one game that makes your gun look different. So that value exists. I personally wouldn't pay that, but certainly there are people who would like. to pay that amount of money, who value those items at that level. So the fact that these things are things of value is not really up for debate. That is, in fact, the position that the Kansspel Autoriteit of the Netherlands took in regards to loot boxes, because under 1.1, Article 1.1 of the Wet of the Kansspelen, the Dutch Gambling Act, it is forbidden to provide opportunities to compete for prizes or premiums if the winners are designated, by means of any random process over which the participants are generally unable to exercise a predominant influence. The Dutch Gambling Authority considered that that fits within the within the mechanics of a loot box. And indeed, since 2 years ago, loot boxes are illegal in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, it is not allowed to have, I mean, of course, you can own the games, but the provider of those games is not allowed to sell those loot boxes within the Kingdom of the Netherlands, because you would need a gambling license for it. And there are no gambling licenses for loot boxes. So in effect, it is banned in the country. In the United Kingdom, the position has been different, since a similar analysis taken by the UK Gambling Commission reached a similar decision, in the sense that, yes, this thing look exactly like gambling, but did think that the fact that many of these games do not offer the possibility of selling these items, and so that you would actually be going against the rules if you sell one of the things that you acquired through a loot box, that made the UK Gambling Authority say this isn't gambling. Nevertheless, the House of Lords in late 2020 said that this probably is gambling. We should, instead of waiting to change the regulation of gambling, we should instead just expressly regulate loot boxes. So to conclude, since I see that I have abused your patience slightly more than I should have from the very beginning, let me explain the situation as it is. Video games right now offer a type of transaction in which people maintain a constant commodification of their games, meaning that the companies are constantly trying to extract revenue from the games. There are good reasons for this. Creating a video game now is much more expensive than it was 20 or 30 years ago. So there are good reasons for the companies to want to extend the profitability of a game, since otherwise they might not be able to recoup their investment on sales alone. However, in their desire to obtain that or to extend the profitability of the game, some video game companies have actually engaged in a truly obscene inclusion of gambling mechanics in games. And I can give you a clear example. Before, you saw a picture that I forgot to comment on of Star Wars Battlefront 2. I've never played this game, but you could buy the game for like $60. But if you actually wanted to complete the game, you would have had to, let me just check the slide here because I put it in my notes. Yes, so you had two choices when it came to playing this game. You could spend $2,100, so $2,100 in order to get everything that the game included, or you could have played the game for 4,500 hours in order to accumulate the same level of things that you could do in the game. So kids who bought the game and wanted to do everything that the game allowed either had to blackmail their parents into getting them $2,000, or they had to play for 4,500 hours in order to get what they wanted. That was the game that actually motivated the United States, particularly in the case of the representatives of Hawaii, as well as the UK and the Netherlands, to start looking into the phenomenon of loot boxes. Ladies and gentlemen, I really appreciate your attention, and I look forward to any questions that you might have. Alexandru, I assume that everybody can just unmute their microphones and ask questions.
Yes, but just maybe we can do that in the Q&A portion, if that's okay with you, Alex.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I thought that it was now. Yeah, that's absolutely great. No worries. I will get back to anybody who needs it later then. Fantastic.
Thank you. And thank you so much for the presentation. I will give the floor now to my colleague, Ada.
Okay, so now I give the floor to Delphine Dogot for her presentation for today. Thank you.
Thank you. First,
Is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay, first of all, I would like to thank everyone that made this event possible, and actually have two questions, if that's okay. I am extremely passionate about video games, and I would like to ask Mr. Salmeron, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, sorry. Are there any regulations or laws regarding the transfer of very valuable digital possessions from one player to another?
No, not a specific regulation on the transfer of those specific assets. Depending on what you are selling, you would still be ruled, of course, by civil law in regards to the transfer of assets, but there are no specific regulations on the transfer of these items. Having said that, in many of these cases, what you do have is a private regulation. Many of these video game companies do prohibit the fact that you sell skins of Call of Duty, for example, to somebody else, so that in theory you're acting against the licensing terms of the game. But there are no specific regulations specifically addressing this.
Okay, because I'm asking this because I know that CS:GO basically has a lot of microtransactions, and I believe they're the ones that started this loot box experience. And there are a lot of players who basically negotiate with one another, and most of them can get scammed. Are there any laws protecting them, or what happens if players get scammed? Is it on their own risk, or how do they operate?
I mean, if you get scammed, there is criminal law always. You can if you are a victim of fraud, you still have the right to call the police and say, I have been defrauded. You always have that protection. So just because it is a video game or something like this, it does not in any way mean that the rest of our judicial system or the rest of our legal system does not apply. You might encounter, however, that with this type of situation, if you cannot find, Gamer Boy 420 after that, if you don't know where this person is, it might be very difficult to actually recover your the money that you paid for a skin for Call of Duty or for Counter-Strike. So that is the real challenge of that, is that since it's a completely unregulated, it's an unofficial market, it tends to be an underground market. From time to time, these companies engage in some actions to try to take down websites that are acting as marketplaces for these items. I'm sure that you remember what happened when it comes to Call of Duty, to Counter-Strike, what happened with the skin betting situation.
With third parties sites that were operated by individuals.
That is a much longer topic that it took me a while to understand, because I already find it so bizarre that people pay a lot of money for skins, and that then when I found out that there were gambling involving skin for something, it's layers upon layers upon layers of it. Exactly. And which I think what it does highlight is the fact that if you create any unit of value, people will use it to exchange things. And we've seen this for a long time. We've seen this in prisons. In prisons, cigarettes used to act as currency. Now in the United States, for example, where cigarettes are no longer allowed, ramen noodles, so these little packages of pre-fried noodles, are used as currency. So if the skin trading and stuff like that, basically what it did is that it allowed people to move assets from one point to another without having to go through the traditional banking mechanisms. But yes, if somebody has defrauded you or somebody you can absolutely call the police.
Okay, thank you very much for the advice in case it happens. Thank you.
Thank you. So now I will go to the questions in the chat, and there are quite a few of them. So we will start with the question that Bianca posted, and it says, how do you see these fields of law developing in the future as newer technologies and developments are being made? And maybe Dr. Dogot, you can start if you want.
Oh, it's a very broad question. And also, I don't know, I'm not that good at forecasting, actually. I'm not as good as our computers. So I don't know, there are many things. I think everything is being transformed, so it's hard to say.
I can narrow down that question because I'm very interested in that. How do you see that this move of metadata analysis and the increasing reliance on metadata in relation to our privacy, because we now have all of this situation of tracking through our phones. Last year, the year before, the New York Times had a truly scary report where you could see people moving in very detailed ways, down to Secret Service personnel moving to the White House and the Pentagon. So do you foresee a move to try to limit the amount of data that we are accepting as legitimate to be collected, or that the cat is just out of the bag and that we just have to understand that privacy as we know it is pretty much over?
Well, the question is complicated because on one hand, we want privacy, and obviously you can see, European efforts, for instance, to, sort of structure at least the way privacy or some informations are not being, captured and so on. But on the other hand, in the EU, in the first place, there is a market for data that is huge and that is basically building the capacities of AI in the next decades, right? So everyone wants privacy for themselves, but all the data that we produce so that we can run these calculating machines, right? And so the EU is also, on the one hand, doing the GDPR, and on the other hand, creating a market for data spaces, right? So it's doing both. And so to answer your question, are we going in one direction or another? I think it might depend who we're talking about. For instance, it's possible that some markets, the EU market, will have a higher protection, but it will rely on a lot of data being produced elsewhere. So there is also a distribution of data production or data, gathering that is uneven. And for instance, there are lots of apps today that develop very lousy AIs based on data that they got, in markets in which it's very free. It's very easy to get data on a lot of things and a lot of people in India, for instance, where everybody has a smartphone and they have consumer behavior that in a sense could be compared to the one in Europe or in America. And so, for instance, you have data that are gathered there, but the analytics are used to perform calculations on our European or American consumer behavior, right? So there is an uneven market that is being produced. And, to go back to the topic you touched very, very accurately, is the question of where is the value being produced. And in a sense, I think we'll have a market for data. The European data will be more expensive. It will be available. It will be cheaper elsewhere. And that's part of the architecture that is being built about this. But of course, all of this basically is not very conservative of what we understand as privacy in all sense of the word, right? Privacy is transforming, privacy is changing, and nobody knows exactly how it's going to be shaped. It's not looking like we can think of a world in which we can enjoy the anonymity or the lack of traces left in that we imagined in the liberal world, right? So there is certainly a lot to think about how we're going to design this new institution of privacy that is not going to be the same, and it will have to be designed with other contours, and it's very hard to know how it will look. But what we can decide for sure is maybe how certain government decisions could or even private decisions could or not be based on this data, right? That's one regulatory avenue where we can say, well, you cannot make a database decision in this, when we look at health, for instance, but it's not at all going in this direction. But that might be a way in which we can think about all that. Yeah.
To continue with that, and I'm sorry if I am taking somebody else's moment to ask a question, but to continue on that idea, what is the situation in France, or perhaps in a broader European framework, when it comes to the access that police have to metadata? I know that in the United States recently it was a challenge. In the Netherlands, in Germany has also been a challenge to determine, do you need a court order in order to access it or not? Could you elaborate on that?
It's constantly changing. There are, this year, again, a new law on global security that is being passed, and it's always giving more powers to police, right? So this basically more access to data, more backdoors, more everything. So the data is such a honeypot, nobody can resist. And in particular, I'm particularly interested in this because it's in essence, I think one of the biggest trigger of these, this movement is that in particular in question that relate to security, the appeal to more data is irresistible. I don't know if it's irresistible, but it's hard to resist. And so more and more everywhere, access to metadata is being granted. And with the, I think, fake protection that there is some anonymity sometimes in data that is being gathered, but as we all know, this anonymization of data is only a mask because, you know, even through anonymous data, you can certainly spot people, right? So,
and for the benefit of the audience, when we talk about metadata, do we mean things like if I give you a phone call, it doesn't say what we talk about, but it says who made the call, when we made it, when we were, and who got the call, right? Okay.
Obviously, no. Metadata is no. The data is what is in your email. The metadata is the time you send it, and you
precisely
right. So that's the distinction. Yes, it's not that necessarily anyone needs to spy on everything that we do, but they just need to know when we call each other or when we send an email or where we do this purchase and so on and so forth. So absolutely.
Thank you so much.
No, and I have a question for you now that I have you.
Yes, madam.
I was very interested in this debate, obviously, about this question of whether these rules would produce assets, right? So you were saying, I'm doubtful that this is actually an asset, so that's actually a good, or I don't know what's the legal term you use. So basically, I'm interested in this notion of value production because all you're saying that I'm discovering with your talk is making me thinking a lot about art, right? Or the art market, where nothing has a use, but there's suddenly attraction for certain things that are not necessarily, you know, or hard to rationalize in a sense. It's of course value, and you know, it's a way to invest money, but there's also attractions for certain, you know, art pieces that are hard to rationalize in pure, you know, rational economic terms, right? So do you make, so I'm looking at, I'm really interested in your position on this, you know, value production sort of debate where you showed us that there were different opinions on it, and also how you compare this to the art market.
Well, the first issue would be that although certainly I don't see the value in acquiring a skin for a gun on a video game or something like that. I do recognize that it is a thing of value because there are those who are willing to pay that amount. So I'm just saying, well, that exceeds the value that I attribute to it. The difference being that it's quite similar to the art market in that sense, in the sense that the value paid for, the value that something is worth is given by the value that somebody is willing to pay. And it is just as irrational, slightly more, because it is it's not a physical thing. We're seeing something similar now in the case of non-fungible tokens, the NFTs, which are this art that is, so you're basically buying the right to brag that you own a JPEG on a website that may or may not continue to exist 5 years from now. And people are paying, I think, $50,000, and they're getting more and more absurd by the day. But yeah, the issue of value is philosophical, really, but I do believe it's just whatever people are willing to pay for something. It exceeds what I would be willing to pay for it. But
and you think NFTs will change something about the loot box market?
No, but it's similar in the sense that it is something that I consider to be absolutely worthless and more or less just a tax on stupidity, but that there are people who are willing to pay for it. So I mean, it is valuable.
Currency is also just a piece of paper on which we attribute value, right?
Yeah, but I mean, in the particular case of NFTs, unlike, so for those to the benefit of the other side, it doesn't become just a private conversation between Ms. Dogot and myself. NFTs are basically pieces of art which are just pictures on a website, and that website is on the blockchain, which basically just means that there are a registry that is in many computers at the same time, so that nobody can fake this registry, right? Because something that happens normally if you have a piece of art is that, well, we see it now, for example, with the cases involving the looted art in World War II, that you try to find the provenance of art. But the other, in the case of NFTs, you will never have that. There will always be a registry of what you're getting. But unlike a priceless Botticelli that might be hidden in some basement somewhere, we're literally talking about a JPEG. So in other words, an image file that is available on a website, and that the value that you get out of it is just the ability to say, that you own it. There is nothing else. You don't get a print of the art. You don't get you don't even get necessarily an exclusive right to use the art or to own the art, nothing. But it has become, like diamonds and like other things, I think, a sign of status and a sign for a way for people to speculate with large amounts of money. And it has exploded tremendously. Everybody's generating NFTs now. So, but no, it wouldn't affect the loot box at all. It just makes me a bit sadder for humanity, but it doesn't affect the market of loot boxes at all. But thank you very much for your question. I think it's a very valuable one to determine what a thing of value is. In that regard, both the Netherlands as well as the United Kingdom, when it comes specifically to the issue of loot boxes, did agree that the value comes determined by the fact that it has a price in the marketplace. The difference being that in the UK, they said, but if that marketplace is not created by the publisher, then it wouldn't be gambling. So that was the distinction that they made. Mara, by all means.
No, thank you so much for the conversation. It was very interesting, and I will give the floor now to Glory.
Thank you, dear all, once again. And before we proceed to the questions that we had prepared, I would like to yield the floor to David Mustafa, who raised his hand.
Hi, thanks. Thanks to the guests for their wonderful presentation. I actually had a question for Dr. Salmeron. So from a free market perspective, and also considering the fact that you're a commercial lawyer yourself, what do you think about the difference of opinion that Dutch policymakers have in terms of this gambling element that loot boxes have on people, and the British policymakers in those terms? So is this really a genuine concern that people should be worried about their children because they may become future gambling addicts, or is it maybe too regulatory to actually step on that and do something and prevent based on the free market philosophy?
Certainly, I get your point. Thank you very much for the question. So if I am understanding correctly, you're asking me, is it really a problem, the issue of loot boxes? And connected to that, even if it is a problem, shouldn't we just let the free market regulate it? I think that both of them have certain value to it. So first of all, when it comes to video games, since the moment they started, they have been surrounded by moral panics. In other words, people have been scared that video games will make you a school shooter, will make you a Satanist, will give you epilepsy, will do a number of things to you. And since I was a kid, and I'm sure that it hasn't changed until now. Having said that, some of the concerns can be reasonable. For example, although it is true that video games do not cause epilepsy, strong flashes from video games can induce a photosensitive epileptic seizure in a person. In the same way, it is very unlikely that the majority of people who use loot boxes will indeed become addicted to gambling. However, considering that the target market of video games tend to be on the younger side, it does warrant some special degree of concern. Now, there is some data available, because the situation is rather new, that does seek to analyze whether loot boxes develop addictive behaviors on the part of users. And the suggestion seems to be that in a significant minority of users, loot boxes do have the chance of becoming a very big problem. In fact, when you look at freemium games, in other words, those games that are released under for very little money or for no money at all, it is considered that those are largely financed by whales, which are people who spend huge amounts of money every week or every day on these games. So they do have that potential. And keep in mind that if they do fit the definition of gambling, not eliminating them simply means that you are allowing a form of gambling to be not regulated, while every other form of gambling is regulated. So buying a I don't know if they have them in the Netherlands, or I'm sure that they have them in the UK for sure, but they have scratch-off tickets, right? The things that have covered and you scratch with a coin and you see if you got a prize. That is a very highly regulated market, extremely highly regulated market, because it is a form of gambling. So it would make no sense that something like scratch-off tickets would be unregulated, whereas the lottery system of or the roulette system of video games would not be acknowledged and in this case prohibited. Now keep in mind, it's not prohibiting microtransactions, it's only banning a particular behavior that majoritarily gamers, I believe, do not like, and on top of that, that does fit absolutely the definition of gambling. That would be my view. So I don't believe that, I consider myself a proponent of the free market, but I do not believe that, I believe that the free market requires certain amounts of regulation on certain activities. Gambling has traditionally been considered an activity that requires high regulation because of for the potential of creating social harm. And in items that are particularly targeted for children, that requirement is even higher than usual. So that would be my answer to your question. But thank you very much for raising it. I think it's absolutely valid because there is some amount of rhetoric that is alarmist. In fact, when I was trying to find graphics for the presentation, one of them was a baby on a, I think on like a roulette table or something like that. I mean, it's crazy, right? So it's a moral panic, just like there were moral panics about video games when I was a kid. But just because sometimes people exaggerate doesn't mean that there aren't problems. So you can approach the topic by just looking, what is the problem and how can we tackle it without thinking that it is the end of society as we know it, right?
Yes, that yeah, I totally agree with that. Sometimes I was basically a bit confused because, yeah, you have these gaming industries that of course provide a lot of how to say, a profit
for service, yeah.
But at the same time, you also have parents who are overly concerned about their children. I mean, I remember my parents, maybe it's not very relevant over here, but it's always that concern, oh, well, what is my child becoming? So I guess it will be a constant dilemma for people.
Yeah, but I assure you that, I mean, I'm in my 30s, and I think that this was the same in the 80s. It was in the 70s and in the 60s and in the 50s. Every generation has always been afraid of what young people are doing. So it is very common. But sometimes those concerns are valid. I mean, you can look back at the concerns that existed about the hippies and think, well, I mean, a lot of that fear was unwarranted, but some of the fear, for example, about the free love movement was warranted when the AIDS epidemic exploded, and you realize, well, maybe it shouldn't be that free. Maybe we should be more careful about the things that we're engaging in. So you should look at every moral panic and try to understand if there is at the very least a seed of an actual problem that needs to be addressed. But yeah, I mean, the UK is not like suddenly filling itself with young gamblers, whereas the Netherlands is free of them. I mean, there is certainly room on either way.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, there's a question also from Sarah in the chat, directed to Dr. Dogot. What are the main challenges of this field of law within the international field? Do you see it as progressively getting uniformed between different countries, or is it more dependent on domestic standards?
So it depends what you're looking at, but obviously a lot, the globalization makes a lot of, norms and legal standards look alike and be similar, but obviously each jurisdiction has its own way of dealing with regulatory challenges. Juan just showed us that, even in the EU, we have different solutions to a similar problem. So obviously there are differences in the way that different jurisdictions address different problems, but there are trends, right? There are trends that are just because there is a solution that seemed to be the best one for a lot of people at the same time, but also because we have international organizations that also foster certain solutions, right? For instance, certainly the OECD or the World Bank have a way to think about modes of finding regulatory solutions that tend to be similar, or there are global law, let's say, forums in which jurisdictions share their solution and think about that. Specifically because in the digital world, the territorial jurisdiction is something that makes less and less sense, right? Both globalization and digitalization of exchanges has made the territorial jurisdiction more vulnerable. And so obviously solutions are, there is this tendency to think that solutions need to be found at the global level for antitrust, for, gambling regulation, for all sorts of digital issues. There is both a call to find global solution, but obviously the way we have structured our legal systems makes it that eventually the actual positive law solution are distinguished by states. But what is the tendency? The tendency, I think, is to think about it is to play on both fields, right? So there's a tendency to strategically play on both fields. Obviously, there will be, so we have just now seen jurisdictions that say, well, we make Bitcoin a national currency, and there will be a competition and a concurrence between different jurisdictions addressing these new issues caused by digital technology in different ways, right? Like we've always have seen in the world, right? There is also a legal market besides all the markets that we've mentioned tonight. There is also a market to go for where the legislation might be favorable or not for certain things. So both a harmonization, if you want, and also a competition, but that's the beautiful chaos of global governance that we are experts in. So it's always been the same in this sense. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Dogot. Okay, so there's another question in the chat, this time for Dr. Salmeron. How exactly do loot boxes contribute to the market for in-game purchases?
So I don't quite understand the question, so I am going to answer what I think I am being asked, but by all means, complete it in the chat if I am messing it up a little bit. So if you ask me what is the role that loot boxes play in the in-game transactions, in the sense of whether they make it more popular or not, the role that they play is that by the fact that they are very cheap, they add up, of course. They are an easy way through which players continue to pay, because you think, well, what's €1, right? I'm gonna give it a shot and I'll pay €1. The problem is, especially you will notice this on your phones. If you download a game on your phone and you wanna play it, and you're going to see that, for example, I don't know, if you get one of those bejeweled games, the one where you have to put jewels together, or something with guns, that the amount of money that you would actually have to pay to get those things would be gigantic. You would actually have to pay like $100 or $200 for a game that maybe you should pay 40 cents for. And the reason for that is because since they are small transactions, they create an incentive for people to pay money. And that way, more people pay a lot of money maintaining the commodification of the video game on the long term. That is what I am guessing I am being asked. So the way in which loot boxes help is that they are fun, they are tempting, they are designed so as to create a certain addictive response similar to what happened with Skinner boxes, so that by having them there, people are more likely to come back and try again than they would if you just sell them the thing. Why would you come back to buy? Sorry that I keep talking about guns. Like, why would you come back to get another shotgun if you already got one? But if the next one could be better, you're going to keep coming back because, last time I was so close, so I'm gonna try again. And it's the way gambling works. I mean, it's the function. So by including it there, more people might want to be tempted to spend money, and the evidence shows that it has worked. Now, many game companies, Blizzard, Activision, for example, the company that developed Warcraft, makes more money from microtransactions than from selling the games. So the way in which the market has shifted is tremendous. And that creates the challenge of incentives, because now video game companies have an incentive to generate profit afterwards. So that this game that they're selling, they have a real incentive, nefarious incentive to create incomplete products so that people will buy the pieces. That is why there was this graphic of a burger with microtransactions where you only get the bread, but you pay extra for the meat, you pay extra for the tomato, and you pay extra for the lettuce. So that is the concern. I think that was the question, and I think that was the answer. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for taking questions. We know that we're going a bit over time, but we have only a few more left, so I hope that's okay with you. And on that note, next one is for Dr. Dogot. What do you think of using citizen data in politics based on experience of Cambridge Analytica 2016 US election? What role will data analytics and usage play in politics in the future? And this question is from Atuli.
Thank you for this question. Yes, so I think Cambridge Analytica is really a turning point in at least everyone looking at the way, data and people's behavior and people's data can actually shift things and influence decision making at a large scale, right? So I think that has been a wake-up call. Nonetheless, I'm not necessarily optimistic in the formal separation between, political decisions and political movements and the analytics of people's behavior and opinions and so on. So because politics and democracy has, for not only a few years, but for centuries, been based on this notion of opinion and increasingly being interested in tracking this opinion and measuring this opinion, it's not new. Now, what's new, and I think in a sense, this is where I think both Juan and my take join, is that there is a shift in the way that this data is used to nudge or to influence behavior in specific ways, in a way that is more powerful than we ever could have imagined, right? So now that we know how people behave, it is quite easy to shift a little bit and to make them, buy more, vote less, vote in this direction, buy in this direction. And I think that's in both the Cambridge Analytica scandal or the skins market or the loot box. What is behind is a very powerful mode of thinking about behavior in terms of behavioral psychology, right? And if you're interested in understanding this, it's really where you should look at the increasing interest for behavioral psychology and game theory in all these devices, trying to shape behavior through thinking that people have, repeat the same biases, would act in certain way, in a certain irrational way in the same situation, and so on and so forth. So what basically behavioral economics and behavioral psychology have brought to the table is now very big in building all these devices. Now, it doesn't mean that these theories are necessarily true. They are very efficient, but what I mean is, and I don't want to say that I absolutely agree with them, but what I mean to say is that it's important to look at these theories and at this work of behavioral economics, because they're actually crucial to understand how these things work, because this is how decisions are being made based on these assumptions. And this is very important to understand both how markets are built, how your social medias are built, how regulations are built. This is certainly the back theory that enlightens these kinds of structuring. I'm answering a bit to the side of the question, but I don't think that we now know what will be the solution for influence political games, and this is true of all the the fields. There is no ready-made solutions, and what we can see now is the beginning of problems. The way we want to create more data and create more powerful actors in the sector is now going against the idea that we need to stop gathering more data or producing more data, and to stop building decision-making systems or decision-making algorithms based on this. It's going the other way. Now, we need to find, this is our job, it will be your job, to find ways in which we can maybe isolate or architectures part of society that would be more isolated, more protected from these types of mechanisms. But the solution is not on the table yet.
I think on that point, Ms. Dogot, I wanted to comment on it because last year, the UK Information Commission officer, I think, made the report on Cambridge Analytica, saying that it actually that basically the whole concern about Cambridge Analytica, the data that had been sold to Russia had actually been that useful, wasn't. And I think that one of the interesting things about the Cambridge Analytica scandal is that even though it has had as behind it the idea that we should be more protected, it has had the very negative effect of actually convincing people that data is actually that useful to predict behavior, which in turn is used by the state, by the powerful structure to say, we can use metadata to arrest people. We can't use because we can predict behavior. And I think that that's it, and you certainly know more about this than me, and I would appreciate it if you can comment on it. And I think that that's dangerous because we are reaffirming a narrative that isn't necessarily true yet, that we know what's going to happen and that therefore it is okay for the police to, or any other state actor to invade our privacy.
I absolutely agree. I think part of the narrative is, that's why I always call to look into the machine, how it's done. Because when you look at it, you see how artisanal these things are done. And so there are lots of assumptions made about future behavior that are made in a very, questionable way. Or at least you can see that they don't work. Even without looking at how they are made, you can see that they don't work. So a lot of what is being produced now in terms of profiling and in terms of behavioral analytics is pure nonsense, right? So a lot of facial recognition, for instance, is now every week some startup says, we can predict sexual orientation, your financial behavior, or whatever, just looking at your face and so on and so forth. So a lot of this is, of course, overstated. In general, I think, and this is why I emphasize this in my talk, that the work that is being done between the data collection and the data is not collected, that is not available, and the information or the knowledge is huge, right? And so it is not that we collect the data and immediately we have knowledge that we can action. It's all built on reasoning and decision making that we make, and these systems are very much criticizable. There are lots to say about how they're being built, both on their efficiency, on their ethical or political ground, but also because they don't work. And I totally agree with you that a lot of profiling insights is pure nonsense, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have an effect. So that's where I go into governance. It's not because it's false and it doesn't work that people don't use it. Governance may rely on financial behavior in order to fight tax evasion because they don't have anything else to do it. And so there's just, even though everybody sees that it's not exactly accurate, it's a lot of it is false negatives and all of this, they will still use it because there's nothing else that they can use. And this seems to be the most efficient thing to do anyway. Right. So because there's this, we have the impression that if the data is there, we need to have a way to base our decision on the data. And here, I think there's lots of work for us to develop our critical skills and technical skills in understanding more about the way in which this information, this knowledge is produced, and to criticize both its effect and its construction.
What I think it is important, sorry, just one thing for students to remember, because I think that the needs have changed over time, is that you have to become very aware when it comes to data that a big chunk of what you see every day on your phone and on your computer has really been customized to you, right? So a lot of based on the data that they already have on you is the information that you're going to be able to access, so that you truly need to develop, as you develop as an adult, you need to develop the ability of critical thinking and of actively trying to engage with the sources that you use to understand where the ideas are coming from, because otherwise you just become a victim of the people targeting you because they control the narrative that you develop. So just be mindful of that. And you can see that from the scientific to the silly, right? It doesn't matter what you Google, the echo chamber starts to build more and more and more. And it has very positive results. I like that when I get on Spotify, I get suggested music that I actually like. But it is not so positive that when I Google, I don't know, parliamentary democracy, I will get results that are closer to my view of democracy than if it was just a neutral party. So you do have to be mindful of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And also mindful that the way that it's not just targeting you and it's not based on your behavior, it's based on everyone's behavior. So you can't really escape that. Even if you feel it, you don't nurture the machine, which is almost impossible to do. Anyway, your content or interaction with digital media will be customized or personalized based on other people's behavior, right? So there's no way out of this. Trying to read through it and be, as Juan just mentioned, critical about it, and to have ways to read through this in a distance and critical way. And find us legal solutions, because this is your job now.
That's the job, correct.
Yes, that is true. And thank you for the conversation and also for the advice. As you said, like, we all pretty much can agree that this is something that all of us should look into, especially with how much we're using phones and internet. So thank you so much. This will be the second to last question. If you have any other questions, now is the time to ask them. And thank you again, everyone, for staying over. And this was actually the first one that we got. And it says, what do you think of using cryptocurrency in gaming? Will it create legal challenges for authorities?
I mean, the same, in principle, everything else that I already said applies if we were to consider cryptocurrency as a method of payment, because even though they're not currencies in the sense that they are not issued by a national state, they're not recognized as legal tender, although I think Nicaragua was going to do it now, or maybe Honduras, one of those two. In principle, it doesn't really matter. You're trading something for something else, so it wouldn't change any of the criteria about gambling at all. Whether if in exchange for one cow, I can win a house, it's still gambling, right? It's just that I'm paying you in cows. It is not a very practical method of gambling, but if they'll take your cow, go for it. So the cryptocurrency situation wouldn't change. There are challenges to the cryptocurrency in general, but those would not be unique to this issue at all. I am sure, of course, that cryptocurrency allows for gambling in a more uncontrolled way, because it's more difficult to trace, but there is nothing that comes to mind that would be applicable specifically just because you're paying with Bitcoin or Dogecoin, Ethereum, or anything else. None at all. Maybe
you can keep your skin afterwards, right? If your skin becomes an NFT, then you actually have some ownership.
Yeah, for a little bit.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your answers. And we'll now be proceeding to our last question, which is a bit more professional. The person asked, what is the potential for students specializing in the legal or financial technology field on the job market in the near future? And the person specified that it was in the context of the blockchain law.
A lot. Obviously, I mean, I sincerely do believe. So I don't think that Bitcoin in particular is going to become a currency at any point. I think that there are a lot of reasons for that, but it doesn't really, it's not really relevant. I think that blockchain technology itself, so in other words, the idea of distributed ledgers, will indeed become a more normal part of transactions. In shipping law, it is already being used in bills of lading, which is one of the elements that you use in the transportation of cargo. So certainly, if you are interested in information technology and its interactions with the law, in my opinion, although Dr. Dogot, I'm sorry, might have a different view on the topic, I believe that there is certainly space to grow there. I do think that since it's pretty early on, there is a lot of, it's like being in a dark room trying to find the light switch. I mean, there is still, there is a lot of uncertainty as to where it's going to go. Yeah, there is certain, if you want to do this with your life, I wouldn't recommend to specializing exclusively on cryptocurrencies, because that it's extremely narrow unless you're doing like a PhD or something like that. But I think that there is 100% absolutely a lot of space to specialize in that area. Yeah, if you want to do that, there is a lot to do.
Yeah, and to add to that, of course, I think you know, whatever the field you're interested in, whether finance or family law or whatever it is, having your eyes on what's going on in the tech world will certainly, you know, shape your field in certain ways in the future, and it will be a very good way to enter this field. So in any case, I think whatever the topic you're interested in or the field you're interested in, having some insight into tech is very useful, and so both for the job market, but also for you to understand how things work in your field. But more, maybe what I can add to this is that I think, and I join Juan in saying, you know, don't focus on one tech. What you need to imagine is that the world that we're seeing today, we are telling you it's all changing, it's all changing. It's changing at a pace that is, you know, huge. By the time you finish your master's degree, or by the time you finish, you know, the first part of your career, things will be very different already. And so what you need to develop is not necessarily, you know, a static knowledge on specific field or tech, but to develop the skill to be agile and be able to follow all these moves throughout your life, right? And this is sort of I think one way to go about this field is to develop this, you know, curiosity and agility in being able to understand these changes, rather than to specialize in one specific technology, because they will, you know, blockchain might be, you know, surpassed by, you know, quantum computing, and, you know, all sorts of things can happen. And what you need to be able is to understand these changes. This would be my advice.
Thank you. And just before we are officially closing, I hope you don't mind, but I would like to give the floor to my colleague David to make an announcement, a short one. He's also the editor-in-chief of ILSA. So David, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Mara. First of all, I would really like to thank the guests we had today. Thank you for the conversations, the presentation, and also for the great insight into this matter. I can see by the number of the participants, and I'm sure there will be more people watching this since it's being recorded. This was a very interesting topic, and it really relates to today's society. So thank you very much. It's really appreciated. My announcement concerns my announcement concerns the next event that ILSA will have. So it's ILSA Journal has decided to branch out a little bit and to expose itself a little bit more, go out of the, say, turtle's house or turtle's whatever that may be. So basically we will organize a book promotion for one of our alumni. The topic is about Israel and Palestine. I'm sure that has a lot of discussion points that needs to be risen, and it concerns reaching a peaceful solution regarding the situation. So everyone is invited. The attendance is free, and yeah, I look forward to seeing everyone there. And yeah, thank you very much again.
When is it? When is it, David?
So it's in the 14th of June. It's Monday. It's 6:30 as well. So we will also provide the link. We will also share it on Blackboard and other portals. So if anyone is interested, then by all means, you're more than welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. And also, speaking of feedback, I hope that the both of you could have seen the chat, because we received a lot of messages, and this has been constant throughout the event, like people texting and saying that this is great and that they really appreciated it, that they would hope in the future this will become also something that we learn in school, like actual lectures. So thank you very much for this.
So, sorry, what do you think we do in lectures?
No, but I mean like these topics, you know, like kind of branch out of the official ones. Like I don't know, for example, I mean, I'm not saying that the official ones are not good, but like
tell me, Mara, tell me.
No, but maybe also adding like gaming law, for example, would pique interest for a lot of people, and also maybe focusing a bit more on legal technology, because as you said, like it's something that we are now having this event online, you know, like legal technology is a very big part of our lives, especially my generation. So I think it should be something that's a bit more current, and not just a specialization, but also maybe a mandatory course. So that was
certainly,
yeah, that was what I was trying to say.
Revolutionize the curriculum. You're right. Absolutely.
Yes. But again, thank you very much for the discussion. And I think, yeah, I speak for everyone when I say that this was great. And thank you everyone for joining. And again, to the ELE Society and to Glory for this collaboration. We are very happy about this. So thank you very much for joining. We hope that you have a great night, and good luck to everyone with exams, because those are also coming up soon. So thank you again, Dr. Salmeron and Dr. Dogot. We hope that you also enjoyed it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was.
Sorry.
Please go ahead, Doctor.
I just wanted to congratulate you all, because this is, wonderful initiatives, very well organized and very well crafted. You do this both professionally, very professionally, and also very nicely. So congratulations. I'm very pleased, and I also had a lot of fun tonight. So thank you.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. I like to nerd out about this type of topics. So it was very fun for me. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the invitation. And yeah, congratulations. It is not easy to organize things, particularly when you're just a student and you're nervous about asking for stuff. So I'm really happy that you did. I'm really happy that you're trying to expand much more. And any of you who has, from either university, if you have any topics that you're interested in and you want to have resources, you can always contact me. I'm happy to help students. So that's great. Thank you so much.
Same here. So feel free to communicate my email, so that if you want to reach out, I'm happy to follow up on conversations.
Yes, maybe Glory can put it in the chat, or if you do not mind.
I'll do it. Glory, you don't have to remember my email for work.
And also, we will be posting the recording on YouTube. I hope that's okay with the both of you.